The wagon wheels stopped turning. Little Molly pressed her face against the rough canvas, watching her stepmother climb down with that cold look in her eyes. "This is where you get off, girl," Martha said, not even looking back. The 8-year-old clutched her worn rag doll as the wagon rolled away, leaving her alone on the dusty trail with nothing but sagebrush and endless sky. She didn't know that watching from the ridge above was Jake Morrison, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, who would soon change her life forever. The autumn wind cut through Molly's thin dress like a knife. She stood in the middle of the Oregon Trail, watching the dust cloud from her stepmother's wagon grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Her bare feet were already sore from the rocky ground, and the sun was getting low in the western sky. "Mama," she whispered to her rag doll, Sarah. It was the only thing she had left from her real mother, who had died of fever 2 winters ago. "What do we do now?" Molly had always known Martha didn't want her around. After Papa died in a mining accident last spring, Martha made it clear that feeding one mouth was hard enough. "You're not even my blood," she'd said plenty of times. "Your papa left me nothing but debts and a mouth to feed." The little girl looked around at the empty prairie. She'd heard the grown-ups talk about wolves and bears and hostile Indians. Her stomach was already growling, and she had nothing to eat. No blanket to keep warm, no shoes for her feet. But Molly was tougher than she looked. Living with Martha had taught her to be strong. She picked a direction and started walking, holding Sarah tight against her chest. Up on the ridge, Morrison lowered his spyglass. He'd been tracking a herd of wild Mustangs when he spotted the wagon. Something about the way the woman had dumped the child and driven off without looking back made his jaw clench tight. Jake was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered hands and kind brown eyes. At 35, he owned the largest ranch in Wyoming Territory, the Double M, with more cattle than he could count, and a big house that echoed with loneliness. Folks called him the richest cowboy in 3 counties, but all that money couldn't fill the empty rooms of his heart. He'd been married once, to a sweet girl named Elizabeth. They'd planned to fill their house with children, but Elizabeth had died of childbirth fever, taking their baby son with her. That was 10 years ago, and Jake had been alone ever since. Now he watched this little girl walking across the prairie like she owned it, her head held high despite being abandoned. Something about her reminded him of Elizabeth, that same stubborn courage. Jake made his decision. He spurred his horse down the ridge. Molly heard the horse before she saw it. She turned around, clutching Sarah tighter, ready to run if she had to. But when she saw the rider, something about him seemed different from the rough men who had sometimes visited Martha. Jake pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, miss," he said in a gentle voice. "You seem to be a long way from anywhere." Molly lifted her chin. "I'm going to Oregon," she announced, though she wasn't sure which direction that was. "Oregon's a far piece from here," Jake said, trying not to smile. "Mind if I ask where your folks are?" "Don't have any folks," Molly said simply. "My mama died and my papa died, and my stepmother left me here." Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Left you here? On purpose?" she said. "She couldn't feed me anymore, said I wasn't her problem." Molly's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was talking about the weather. Jake climbed down from his horse and knelt in the dust so he could look Molly in the eye. "What's your name, little lady?" "Molly Rose Patterson." "And this is Sarah." She held up her doll. "Well, Miss Molly Rose Patterson, I'm Jake Morrison. I own a ranch not too far from here, and I was wondering if you might like to come have some supper with me. My cook makes the best beef stew in Wyoming Territory." Molly studied his face carefully. Martha had always warned her about trusting strangers, but this man had kind eyes, and she was so hungry her stomach hurt. "I don't have any money to pay for supper," she said. "Well, that's lucky," Jake said with a smile, "because I don't charge little girls for supper. It's against my policy." Despite everything, Molly almost smiled back. "You have a policy about little girls?" "I do indeed. Rule number 1, Little girls eat for free. Rule number 2. Little girls should never be left on dusty trails all by themselves. Rule number 3. Little girls should always have a warm place to sleep. Molly looked around at the empty prairie, then back at Jake's honest face. Are you a good man, Mr. Morrison? The question hit Jake right in the heart. I try to be, Miss Molly. I try real hard to be. She nodded slowly. Sarah says it's okay to trust you. Jake looked at the worn rag doll seriously. Well, if Sarah says, so then that settles it. He stood up and held out his hand. Shall we go get that stew? Molly put her small hand in his big one, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for 10 years started to thaw. The Double M Ranch spread across the valley like a small town. Molly had never seen anything like it. There were barns and corrals, a bunkhouse where the Cowboys lived, and a cookhouse where delicious smells were already drifting out into the evening air. But it was the main house that made her gasp. It was bigger than any building she'd ever seen, made of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Lanterns glowed in the windows, making it look warm and welcoming. You live in there all by yourself? Molly asked, as Jake helped her down from his horse. Just me and Rosa, my housekeeper, Jake said. Gets pretty quiet sometimes. Rosa appeared on the porch as if she'd been waiting for them. She was a plump Mexican woman with graying hair and the kindest face Molly had ever seen. Dios mío, Rosa exclaimed when she saw Molly. Jake, what have you brought home now? Rosa. This is Miss Molly Rose Patterson, Jake said formally. She's going to be our guest for supper. Rosa came down the porch steps and knelt in front of Molly, taking in her thin dress, bare feet, and tangled hair. Ay, pobrecita, she murmured. You look like you haven't eaten in days. Just since yesterday, Molly said. And I had half a biscuit then. Rosa's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice stayed gentle. Well, we'll fix that right up. Come, Nina. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. Jake watched Rosa lead Molly into the house, chattering in a mixture of English and Spanish. The little girl looked so small in the big doorway. She's staying, isn't she? Rosa asked later, after Molly had eaten 2 bowls of stew and fallen asleep on the sofa by the fireplace. Jake looked at the sleeping child, still clutching her doll. I can't just send her to the orphanage in Cheyenne. She's been through enough. She's been through more than enough, Rosa agreed. Look at those hands. She's been working hard for someone so small. Jake had noticed Molly's hands too, rough and calloused from work, with old scars from what looked like kitchen burns. What kind of woman made an 8-year-old child work so hard, then abandoned her on the trail? I'll ride into town tomorrow, Jake said. Talk to Judge Wheeler about what needs to be done legal-like. Rosa smiled. So she is staying. Jake looked at Molly again. Even in sleep, she held her doll protectively. Yeah, he said softly. She's staying. Molly woke up in the softest bed she'd ever felt. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she saw Rosa setting a pitcher of warm water on the washstand. Buenos dias, Nina, Rosa said with a smile. Did you sleep well? Molly sat up, looking around the room in wonder. It had real glass windows with curtains, a pretty quilt on the bed, and a rug on the floor. Is this really for me? See, this is your room now, Rosa said. Jake, he say you are to stay here as long as you want. Really? Molly couldn't believe it. But I can't pay anything. Rosa sat on the edge of the bed. Nina, listen to me. Jake, Morrison, he is a good man. His heart was broken a long time ago and it never healed right. But yesterday, when he brought you home, I saw something in his eyes I haven't seen in 10 years. What did you see? Hope, Rosa said simply. Now come, let's get you dressed. I have something for you. The something turned out to be a beautiful blue dress with petticoats and everything. It was a little big, but Rosa promised to alter it. There were also real shoes, the first Molly had ever owned. Where did these come from? Molly asked, running her hands over the soft fabric. Rosa's eyes grew sad. They belonged to someone who doesn't need them anymore. Someone who would be happy to know a little girl was wearing them. Molly didn't understand then, but she would later learn that the clothes had belonged to Elizabeth Morrison, Jake's wife. He'd kept them all these years, unable to throw them away or give them to anyone. Until now. When Molly came downstairs in her new dress and shoes, Jake was waiting in the kitchen with a plate of hotcakes and bacon. "Well, don't you look fine?" he said, and his voice sounded a little rough. "Rosa says I can stay here," Molly
work
said,
hard.
climbing onto
Molly
a chair
said
that was
seriously.
almost too tall for
Martha
her.
said I was good at
"That's
scrubbing
right,"
floors and
Jake
washing
said,
dishes.
sitting across from her.
"I'm sure you are,
"If you want
Jake
to,
said
that is."
gently.
But
Molly
little
took a
girls should
big
be
bite of
learning to
hot
read.
cake, not
It was
scrubbing
better than
floors.
anything she'd
Molly stared
ever
at him.
tasted. "You'd teach.
What would I have to do?
Me to read?
To earn my keep,
If you
I
want to
mean.
learn?" Jake
Molly's
exchanged a
eyes
look
filled
with
with
Rosa.
tears.
She'd
Well,
always wanted to
I
learn
reckon
to
a young
read,
lady like
but
yourself
Martha said
has
it was a
plenty to
waste of
learn.
time for someone
Reading
like
and
her.
writing and arithmetic.
"Yes, please.
How to ride a
She
horse.
whispered.
How to be a
Jake
proper
reached
ranch
across the table
lady.
and patted her small hand. "Then that's what we'll do." The next few weeks passed like a dream for Molly. Every morning, Jake would spend an hour teaching her letters and numbers. Her quick mind soaked up everything like a sponge. Soon she was reading simple words, then sentences. "Look, Sarah," she would tell her doll, "I can read what this says. The cat sat on the mat. Isn't that wonderful?" In the afternoons, Jake taught her to ride. He had a gentle old mare named Buttercup, who seemed to understand that her rider was special. At first, Molly was scared of being so high off the ground, but Jake walked beside her, one hand on the reins and one ready to catch her if she fell. "You're a natural," he told her after she'd managed to stay on Buttercup for a whole trip around the corral. "Pretty soon you'll be herding cattle with the best of them." Rosa taught her other things, how to cook and sew and run a proper household. But unlike Martha, Rosa made it fun. She told stories while they worked and sang Mexican songs. That made Molly laugh. "In Mexico, where I grew up," Rosa said one day as they made tortillas, "my abuela used to say that God puts people in our path when we need them most. Jake, he needed you, Nina, and you needed him." "But I'm nobody special," Molly said, patting her tortilla into shape the way Rosa had shown her. "Ay, Nina, you are very special. You have a brave heart and a strong spirit. Jake, he sees this. That's why he wants you to stay forever. Forever." The word made Molly's heart skip. She'd never had a forever before. That evening, as Jake was reading her a story about a princess who saved a dragon instead of the other way around, Molly looked up at him. "Jake?" she said. "Yes, sweetheart?" Could I call you Papa?" Jake's hand stilled on the page. For a moment he couldn't speak. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'd be honored," he said softly. "I'd be real honored." Molly smiled and snuggled closer to him. "Good night, Papa." "Good night, little one." Sweet dreams. Life at the double, and wasn't always easy. Molly had nightmares sometimes about being left on the trail, and she would wake up crying for her mama. Jake would come to her room and sit with her until she fell back asleep, sometimes singing the lullabies Elizabeth used to love. There were other challenges, too. Some of the ranch hands didn't know what to make of the boss suddenly having a daughter. They whispered among themselves about how strange it was for a man to take in a stray child. "She's got him wrapped around her little finger," Molly heard Cookie the cook tell one of the other men. "Mark my words, she'll be trouble." But most of the cowboys were kind to her. Old Pete, who'd worked for Jake since the beginning, carved her a little wooden horse. Young Billy taught her to whistle loud enough to call the dogs. And Tex, the foreman, always tipped his hat when he saw her, as if she were a grown-up lady. One day, when Molly had been at the ranch for 2 months, a stranger came calling. He was a thin man in a black suit who introduced himself as Silas Hartwell, a representative of the Territorial Children's Aid Society. "I've heard reports of an unaccompanied minor living at this ranch," he told Jake, looking around disapprovingly. "A ranch is no place for a young girl. She belongs in a proper institution where she can be raised appropriately." Molly, who was hiding behind the kitchen door, felt her heart freeze. Were they going to take her away? This little girl has a home. Here, Jake said, his voice hard as steel. She's been legally adopted. I have the papers from Judge Wheeler. Be that as it may, Hartwell said. A single man raising a child alone is highly irregular. The society feels she would be better served in one of our facilities. Your facilities? Jake's voice was dangerously quiet. You mean that orphanage in Cheyenne where the children work 14 hours a day and sleep 4 to a bed? We provide structure and discipline, Hartwell said stiffly. You provide misery, Jake shot back. Now get off my land before I have you thrown off. After Hartwell left, Molly crept out of hiding. Jake was standing by the window, his hands clenched into fists. Papa, she said in a small voice, are they going to take me away? Jake turned and knelt down, pulling her into his arms. No, sweetheart, nobody is ever going to take you away. This is your home, and I'm your papa, and that's the end of it. But what if they come back? Then we'll fight them again, and again, as many times as it takes. Jake held her tighter. You're my daughter now, Molly Rose Morrison. That's not something anyone can change. Molly felt the fear drain out of her. Morrison. She was Molly Rose Morrison now, not Patterson. She had a real family name. As winter approached, Molly had been at the ranch for 4 months. She could read whole books now, write her name in perfect cursive, and do arithmetic problems that would have stumped children twice her age. She could ride Buttercup without a lead rope and help Rosa with the cooking, but most importantly, she was learning to trust that this new life was real, that Jake wouldn't change his mind and send her away, that Rosa would always be there with a hug and a warm meal, that the nightmares about being abandoned would eventually fade. One snowy December morning, Jake called her into his study. It was a room lined with books with a big desk and leather chairs. Molly had always felt very grown up when Jake brought her in here for her lessons. I have something for you, Jake said, pulling out a small wrapped package. Molly opened it carefully. Inside was a beautiful gold locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. That's Elizabeth, Jake said softly. My wife. She would have loved you very much. She's beautiful, Molly whispered, tracing the photograph with one finger. She always wanted a daughter, Jake continued. Someone to teach and love and watch grow up. I think maybe she sent you to me. Molly looked up at him, her eyes shining. Really? Really. And I want you to have her locket. Not because I'm trying to replace your real mama, but because you're part of our family now. Elizabeth would want you to have it. Jake fastened the locket around Molly's neck. It was a little too big for her, but she wore it proudly. Thank you, Papa, she said, hugging him tight. I'll take good care of it. I know you will, sweetheart. I know you will. That night, as Molly got ready for bed, she looked at herself in the mirror. The scared, hungry little girl who had been left on the trail was gone. In her place was a confident young lady with bright eyes and a future full of possibilities. She touched the locket gently. Thank you, Mama Elizabeth, she whispered. Thank you for sending me to Papa. Spring came early to Wyoming Territory that year. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and Molly celebrated her 9th birthday with the biggest party the Double M had ever seen. All the ranch hands came, along with neighbors from miles around. Rosa made a cake with 9 candles, and Jake gave Molly her own horse, a spirited young mare she named Daisy. Life was perfect, which was why Molly should have known it wouldn't last. Martha Patterson showed up on a hot July morning, driving the same wagon she'd used to abandon Molly nearly a year ago. But this time she wasn't alone. A heavy-set man with mean eyes sat beside her, and 2 rough-looking cowboys rode behind. Molly was in the garden with Rosa when they arrived. At the sight of her stepmother, all the color drained from her face. Dios mío, Rosa breathed, pulling Molly behind her protectively. Jake came out of the barn, and his expression turned thunderous when he saw the visitors. Martha Patterson, he said, his voice cold as winter. You've got some nerve showing your face here. Martha climbed down from the wagon, trying to look dignified in her worn dress. "I've come for my stepdaughter," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your stepdaughter?" Jake's laugh was harsh. "The one you dumped on the trail like a bag of garbage?" I was going through hard times," Martha said, but her eyes shifted away from his. "But things are better now. Cyrus here is my new husband, and we can provide for Molly properly." The heavy-set man stepped forward. "Name's Cyrus Blakemore," he said, "and I aim to collect what's mine." "Molly isn't yours," Jake said quietly, but there was danger in his voice. "She's my legally adopted daughter." "Well, see, that's where you're wrong," Cyrus said with an ugly smile. He pulled out a folded paper. "This here says different. Says I'm her legal guardian now, seeing as how I married her stepmother." Jake took the paper and read it, his jaw getting tighter with every word. "This is a fraud," he said finally. "That's signed by a judge in Colorado Territory," Cyrus said. "All legal and proper." Behind Rosa, Molly was trembling. She remembered Cyrus now. He'd been one of the men who used to visit Martha. He'd always looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I'm not going with you," she said, stepping out from behind Rosa. Her voice was small but determined. Martha's face twisted with anger. "You'll do as you're told, you ungrateful little brat. After all I did for you." "All you did?" Molly's fear was being replaced by anger. "You made me work like a slave. You burned me with the iron when I didn't work fast enough. You left me to die." "I never," Martha protested, but her face was red. "The child has scars," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "I've seen them." Cyrus shrugged. "Kids get hurt, part of growing up. Now we'll be taking her and going." "No," Molly said more firmly. "I won't go. Jake is my papa now. This is my home." Cyrus's eyes got meaner. "Maybe you need to be reminded of your place, girl." He took a step toward Molly, but Jake moved faster. One moment Cyrus was reaching for the child, the next he was on the ground with Jake's boot on his chest. "Touch her and die," Jake said simply.